Welcome to Sir Betterment, where we bring you financial, motivating, and betterment knowledge. In this video, we'll talk about how a kid with $0 created Nike. So without further ado, let's get into it. Nike may be the Greek goddess of triumph, but for most people today, it is the most popular brand in America and one of the largest clothing companies in the world. My favorite athletes, like Lebron James, Michael Jordan, and Tiger Woods, have all worn Nike shoes and clothing. Nevertheless, the star of the show is Phil Knight, the man who founded Nike. Phil worked nonstop for years to build our beloved company into what it is today. Before anything else, let's meet the mastermind behind the iconic and famous company. Phil Knight. Philip Hampson Knight is an American billionaire businessman. He was the company's first chairman and CEO of Nike Inc. With an estimated net worth of $41.5 billion, Forbes listed Knight as the 17th wealthiest person in the world. But the question is, how did someone with $0 create one of the biggest sportswear businesses in the world? Like most ordinary men, Phil Knight started his career with no money and an unclear idea of what he really wanted. Phil studied journalism at the University of Oregon and discovered a passion for running. According to Knight, the concept for his business came from running track at Hayward Field in Oregon and outside of the classroom at Stanford Business School. Phil "Buck" Knight, a self-described average mid-distance runner on the track team at the University of Oregon, observed as Bill Bowerman tinkered with athletes' running shoes. The immediate impact on their performance piqued his interest. Phil trained with Bowerman as a middle-distance runner, and the two developed a close friendship. At the time, they were unaware that their relationship would eventually become the cornerstone of the largest sportswear company in the world. Knight was the first student to test one of Bowerman's sneakers. Bowerman volunteered to take one of his shoes and modify it with his custom design. Knight accepted the offer, and the running shoes allegedly performed so well that his colleague, Otis Davis, eventually used them to win a gold medal in the 400-meter sprint at the 1960 Olympics. Even now, Otis Davis is confident that Bowerman built his shoes just for him. Phil Knight's struggles. Despite all of the lessons and training he had received in college, he wasn't at the required level he wanted. Thus, Phil joined the Army and served for a year, hoping it would give him a sense of purpose, but it didn't. Phil then enrolled in Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, and it was at Stanford that he ultimately discovered his true calling. While working on a project to create a new business that would permanently alter his life, Phil came up with an idea. And with just a pen and some paper, he explained why manufacturing shoes in Japan would be more cost-effective than in Germany. And with that, my ladies and gentlemen, his crazy idea was born. Phil became committed to this project for his business class and began to genuinely think that importing Japanese shoes into the US market would be a profitable business. Yet, when Phil explained this to the class, no one else seemed to share his perspective. He even discussed the concept with a few of his friends, but nobody seemed really interested. After completing business school, Phil returned home to live with his parents in 1962. One day, Phil finally decided he couldn't just wait for the opportunity to knock on his door. He needs to get up and just do it. With his dream in mind, Phil decided that it was time to go to Japan. In 1962, Phil came across a pair of running shoes in the city of Kobe that caught his attention. Tiger was the name of the brand, while Onitsuka was the firm that made the shoes. Not only did he like the style, but the shoes met Phil's two primary requirements: excellent quality and cost effectiveness. Phil was so taken with the shoe that he called the business owners and set up a meeting. The meeting was going smoothly until one of Onitsuka's employees asked what his business name was. His mind went blank for a second, thinking about how he could present a business idea with no company name. All he could think about was going back home. Then he suddenly thought of his childhood wall decorated with blue ribbons from the track. So he answers, Blue Ribbon Sports of Portland, Oregon. He then returns to his presentation and discusses the size of the market and the vast possibilities for a Japanese shoe company to enter America. The CEOs are thrilled since they've been considering expanding their business in America for a while. They provided him with several Tiger shoe prototypes that met his requirements. When they finally asked Phil whether Blue Ribbon would be interested in representing Onitsuka in America, Phil immediately says yes. He requests that they deliver the prototypes to his address in Oregon. The beginning of Blue Ribbon Sports. January, February, March, April, May, June. 6 months and counting. Time passed and no shoe samples arrived, even though Phil had a productive meeting with a Japanese shoe company. He needed clarification on why the samples had yet to arrive at his home. He wrote to them to inquire about the status of the samples promised. Finally, one morning after months of anticipation, 12 pairs of Japanese prototype shoes appeared at his door. Phil immediately met Bill Bowerman to show him the new shoes and get his opinion. Bowerman was so impressed with the prototypes that he surprisingly proposed becoming Phil's business partner. And so Phil and Bowerman joined to form Blue Ribbon Sports, each putting up $500, and with that entire sum, 300 pairs of shoes were ordered from Japan at the cost of about $3.33 per pair. Phil also asked Onitsuka in a letter whether Blue Ribbon Sports could be the exclusive distributor of these Tiger shoes in the western US. Fortunately, they gave their consent, and soon after, in April 1964, a shipment of 300 Tiger shoes from Japan arrived. Phil now had hundreds of shoes to sell, a supplier, and a business partner. The only problem was that Phil needed a place to sell the shoes. Knight and Bowerman first marketed and sold their shoes at various athletic events. Runners and coaches eagerly purchased Onitsuka's shoes after Knight showed them how great they were. In just a few short months, their new business had already sold all its shoes and had to reorder another 300 pairs. At the end of their first term, Blue Ribbon Sports had sold $8,000 worth of shoes. So there was clearly a market for these quality and affordable shoes. Hence, Phil ordered 900 additional pairs from Japan with the money he had earned. Soon after, they hired several sales representatives who worked only on commission, primarily former runners who shared the company's goal. As a result of Blue Ribbon Sports' newfound success, Phil got a bank loan and opened the company's first proper office. But since Bowerman was still working full-time, Phil decided to hire Jeff Johnson as the business's first full-time employee. Later, Johnson would come up with the company's iconic name, Nike. Yet for now, they were still named Blue Ribbon Sports. And since sales increased quickly, they were able to build their own retail store to sell their shoes in 1966. They made an excellent decision when they designed the shop to be a haven for runners, a place where they could gather, chat, and read sports-related books and magazines, which helped them get a lot of attention. The ever-innovative Bowerman presented the Tiger Shoe Company with a new shoe design in 1965 that had a cushioned inner sole, soft sponge rubber in the forefoot and top of the heel, hard sponge rubber in the center of the heel, and a firm rubber outsole to give the proper support for runners. This design would end up being a huge success and a source of conflict between Blue Ribbon and its Japanese supplier. Let's find out why. By the end of 1969, Blue Ribbon Sports (BRS) was successfully selling Tiger shoes, and CEO Phil Knight decided to join his business full-time. The partnership between BRS and Japanese shoe manufacturer Onitsuka Tiger has been successful. The Cortez, created by BRS's co-founder Bill Bowerman, became the go-to running shoe in the years leading up to the 1972 Munich Olympics by capitalizing on an American surge in jogging and running. In the last month of the 1960s, Knight makes his annual trip to Kobe, Japan, to meet the founder and head of Onitsuka Tiger, Kihachiro Onitsuka. They renew their vows by signing a 3-year deal, providing Blue Ribbon Sports rights to market Onitsuka Tigers in the United States, with the condition that BRS distributes Tigers exclusively. Onitsuka's issue was that even though they were able to enter the American market through BRS, they soon realized that unless they increased the number of distributors in America, they were probably losing millions of dollars every year by continuing to market through this relatively young and inexperienced company. Onitsuka learned from other American shoe distributors that the US market had enormous growth potential and that they needed to make a bigger push into other countries' markets, especially the US. With this knowledge, he recruited Soji Kitami, a bold international sales director, to carry out the Onitsuka of the world strategy. Therefore, despite the 3-year exclusive agreement, Kitami met with as many as 18 additional shoe sellers in America. Knight was worried that Kitami's activities might result in a legal dispute, but Kitami saw their agreement's exclusivity as shackles. According to sources, Kitami proposed that Onitsuka Tiger and Blue Ribbon Sports create a joint venture, with Onitsuka having 51% of the firm. Phil was forced to decide between turning over the company to Onitsuka or making their own shoes. Naturally, he turned down the ludicrous and unjust offer and decided they would make their own. Phil and Bowerman realized that losing the Onitsuka Tiger brand was not the end of the world or their company. In fact, it may provide an opportunity for them to grow and expand their business. They have so much more potential than being only a distributor. After all, Bowerman created the Cortez, Onitsuka's best-selling shoe, so why couldn't Blue Ribbon make and sell their own shoes? The revenge. It took Phil some time to recover from the shock of all that had happened at the meeting, but once he had, he decided to act. It was time for that sweet revenge. Phil Knight had sought to rename the business Dimension 6, but Jeff Johnson thankfully was inspired by the name of the Greek goddess and triumphed after seeing it in a dream, so he came up with the name Nike. But first, the new brand needs a unique logo, so they asked Carolyn Davis, a design student at the close-by Portland State University, for some designs. Phil Knight reluctantly chose a swoosh design, saying, "Well, I don't love it, but maybe it will grow on me." Davis got $35 for the design after charging $2 per hour. Phil Knight hosted a party for Davis in 1983 and gave her 500 shares of stock, estimated to be worth around $1 million today. Phil Knight had obviously changed his mind about the logo by this point. After settling on a name and a logo, they still had one important task to do before they could confront Onitsuka. Phil needs a shoe manufacturer that could create brand new, quality shoes at a competitive price. They already had the blueprint for their first pair of sneakers to bear the Nike logo. It was essentially an updated Cortez, so they started thinking about partnering with the best manufacturers to create the new Nike brand. Nonetheless, Phil was careful to avoid repeating his mistake with Onitsuka. As a result, he built a network of manufacturers rather than coming to just one, giving him complete control over manufacturing. Blue Ribbon Sports versus Onitsuka. The connection between Blue Ribbon Sports and Onitsuka didn't stop there. By the end of 1971, BRS was producing and selling shoes under its own brand, Nike, thus challenging the integrity of its agreement with Onitsuka. Yet, BRS was the one to take the first legal action, bringing a lawsuit against Onitsuka Corporation. Knight and Bowerman thought Onitsuka had violated their contract by looking for new distributors in America before their contract ended. In response, Onitsuka filed a countersuit, claiming that BRS had infringed their trademarks and that they had not sought out any other distributors in the US. It was an existential crisis for BRS and the Nike executives. If Onitsuka triumphed, BRS would no longer have the sole right to market the shoes that Bowerman had created. This case is a win-or-die situation, Bill said. Ultimately, the federal judge decided in favor of Blue Ribbon Sports, allowing both businesses to sell identical shoes in the US, with the condition that BRS had the exclusive right to sell them under the trademarked names. The Onitsuka Corporation also agreed to pay BRS an out-of-court settlement to end their legal dispute. Goodbye, Blue Ribbon. Hello, Nike. When Blue Ribbon Sports changed its name to Nike in 1971, the business had already surpassed the $1 million annual sales. From that point on, Nike's growth exploded as it became the most recognizable sports brand in the world. In addition, the 1972 Olympics gave Nike a lot of publicity on a worldwide scale, thanks to their significant participation in the event. As a result, revenue increased quickly, reaching $14 million in 1976. The following year, it doubled, reaching $28 million. At around the same time, Phil began establishing additional manufacturing facilities in other parts of the globe and funneling the proceeds back into expansion. And it was effective because Nike's sales were skyrocketing. Not only were they expanding their market, but they were also becoming a fashion statement. Sales were phenomenal, word of mouth was excellent, and Nike's legal troubles seemed to be in the rear view. The only minor issue was that they were still very short on funds. Phil was putting every cent he could back into expanding his business. He even took out loans to speed up the process. It was either grow or die for him. He continued to place increasingly large shoe orders, create more shops, and hire staff members. Yet many American companies were jealous of their success and carefully watched them, waiting for their chance to ruin the business. But then, one morning, he received a letter that suddenly changed everything. The US Customs Service sent Nike a bill stating that Nike owed them $25 million. Phil first assumed it had to be a prank or an odd error. However, it was immediately evident from a few phone calls that the bill was 100% real, and the underlying cause of this was rather evil. Due to Nike's success and expansion, its US rivals, Keds, Converse, and a few local companies had begun to fear for their future. They saw Nike as a danger that may force them out of the market. They thus sent officials to Washington and persuaded the customs agency to enforce something known as the American Selling Price to stop Nike's growth, an outdated law known as ASP, which dates back to before the Great Depression, mandated that if a shoe is made in the US, anybody importing a pair from another country must pay an import tax equal to 20% of the price of the competitor's shoe. This regulation was enacted primarily to discourage businesses from importing goods that could be domestically produced and to promote nationalism. Also, Nike's rivals have pressured the federal government to uphold this outdated law. However, since Nike didn't manufacture its shoes in America but in Japan, its rivals realized they needed to replicate Nike's shoes and charge high fees for them. By doing so, they had effectively produced an American substitute for Nike's shoes. Even if Nike shoes were the originals, since their products were imported from another nation, they were subject to high import taxes. Essentially, this meant Phil would have to pay an extra $6 for each pair they imported. Nike's $25 million bill was made worse because the import charges were retroactively applied to each pair of sneakers they imported over 3 years. Phil knew Nike would go bankrupt if they had to pay that much money. The only option was to fight or lose the company. Phil recruited one of the greatest attorneys he could find, and for 3 years, Phil battled the customs office and its rivals, Converse and Keds, in court. In an effort to gather supporters, Nike created a TV ad in which they shared their stories and explained what was happening to them. And luckily, they succeeded. When Nike's rivals and the government realized they would fight this tooth and nail, they ultimately settled for $9 million rather than $25 million. Phil still felt it was a considerable sum of money, but within that 3 years, Nike had expanded significantly, with revenues reaching $440 million. They now had the means to resolve their differences and put the incident behind them. After surviving yet another near-death experience, the corporation emerged from the experience more resilient than ever. Celebrity endorsements. Apart from the quality of its products, the company's celebrity endorsements are its greatest asset. They made a major splash at the beginning of their careers by signing players like Lebron James, Kobe Bryant, and Tiger Woods. Michael Jordan has been Nike's most successful endorsement to date, both for the brand and its sponsor. Before the start of Jordan's first professional season in 1984, Nike attempted to swoop in and get an endorsement from him after seeing his potential. Jordan had never worn a pair of Nikes before and was hoping for an Adidas contract. But he decided to sign with Nike after a meeting when they offered him $500,000 a year for 5 years, Mercedes cars, and shoes made to his exact specifications. Jordan rapidly became a super celebrity. His shoe brand, Air Jordans, debuted on the market and generated more than $100 million in sales by the end of 1985, making their partnership a huge success. The dark secret behind the swoosh. Although the brand itself is a celebration of mankind, there is a dark secret behind its success. Unfortunately, Nike has treated its employees with complete indifference. In 1991, American labor activist Jeffrey Ballinger published a report on Nike's manufacturing operations in Indonesia, uncovering a scandal: below minimum wages, child labor, and horrible working conditions akin to a sweatshop, which is a factory or workshop where workers put in long hours for little pay in highly hazardous environments. A U.S. college student, Jim Keady, investigated Nike's harsh labor practices in the 1990s. His documentary Beyond the Swoosh revealed how employees who were paid $1.25 a day were forced to live in slums next to open sewers and share bathrooms with numerous families. In addition, Life magazine published an article on child labor in 1996 that included a graphic image of a 12-year-old Pakistani child stitching a Nike soccer ball. Sweatshops are widespread in developing nations like Indonesia, India, Thailand, Bangladesh, and Cambodia, where labor rules are seldom enforced. Corporations like Nike and Adidas may advertise that their factories follow strict codes of conduct, but it is hard to determine whether these regulations are truly enforced in underdeveloped nations. While the world condemned Nike's obvious disregard for its overseas employees in the 1990s, the U.S. corporation promised to improve the dreadful working conditions. Were their words only lip service, or did they take action? Leila Salazar, director of corporate accountability at Global Exchange, said to The Guardian in 2001, Nike has continued to treat the sweatshop issue over the last 3 years as a minor public relations inconvenience rather than a serious human rights concern. But the company thought otherwise. I think we've made significant strides, and I'm proud of what the company has done over the last 3 years, said Phil Knight. It may take a while longer, but I think they will understand that Nike is a good citizen in all the countries it operates in. In 2007, the world began embracing corporate responsibility. Nike published a list of its 700 factories around the world so that people could verify the company's compliance with its policies. Stepping down as a legend, Knight announced his retirement from Nike's board of directors in June 2015, and the firm named Mark Parker as his successor as CEO and president. Remarkably, he built the largest sports brand in the world from his humble beginnings as a young man with no prior experience who dared to go to Japan to try and make his crazy dream a reality. And with that, my ladies and gentlemen, is how you make a multi-billion company with only dreams and aspirations. But what about you? Do you have any crazy ideas or insane proposals in your mind? Let us know in the comment because one of you might be the next Phil Knight one day. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like, Also, click the subscribe button and notification bell for more videos like this. See you at the next one.